This is Plant-Based Briefing. 93% of climate news never mentions meat from sentientmedia.org. And I'm Marian Erickson, and this is the curated content plant-based podcast where I narrate a variety of articles related to plant-based and vegan topics with permission in about 10 minutes or less every weekday. Today's article is from Sentient Media. They're a nonprofit news organization that's changing the conversation around animal agriculture across the globe. They create public awareness of the agriculture industry's impact on the climate crisis, extraction of natural resources, and systemic exploitation of those bound up in food production. And they do it through critical commentary. They have amazing writers, investigative journalism. They create resources, and they strengthen the journalist and advocate community, partnering with publishers, and they hold the media accountable when it fails to report on the most pressing issues of our time. They're pretty amazing. So now let's get to today's plant-based briefing. 93% of climate news never mentions meat from sentientmedia.org. The effects of animal agriculture on the environment and climate are vast. It is a leading cause of deforestation and is responsible for between 11.1 and 19.6% of global emissions. It's more important than ever to report on the connection between meat consumption and the climate crisis, yet the public isn't getting the message. 40% of respondents to a recent Newsweek poll said they believe eating less meat would not reduce climate emissions. Just how often does climate media mention animal agriculture? Sentient Media and Faunalytics set out to answer that question and found it to be a shocking small number, just 7%. In a data analysis of climate media coverage published May 31st, the two organizations reviewed the 100 most recent climate articles as of September 2022, published by 10 national outlets, including the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. Out of 1,000 articles, just 7% mention animal agriculture, and within that coverage, much of the reporting covers climate impacts on livestock rather than how meat production is a source of greenhouse gas emissions. Out of the 1,000 articles studied, climate coverage addressed the following themes in order of frequency. Note that the percentages don't add up to 100% because multiple themes were often covered within the same article. Theme coverage in climate articles. Mining, manufacturing, and energy production was covered 68% of the time. Emissions, 67%. Fossil fuels, 53%. Transportation, 42%. General agriculture, 17%. Residential, 16%. Animal agriculture, 7% of the time. Land use changes 5%, consumerism 4%, and regenerative agriculture 3%. This makes animal agriculture one of the least discussed causes of climate change in the media. In contrast, mining, manufacturing, and energy production were mentioned in 68% of articles, with fossil fuels at 53%. Read the full report linked here, called Animal Agriculture is the Missing Piece in Climate Change Media Coverage, at faunalytics.org. The report also includes a qualitative review highlighting missed opportunities to show readers the connection between what we eat and climate pollution. For example, the report points to stories that reported on how drought conditions during the summer of 2022 endangered livestock populations, forcing farmers to sell animals for slaughter when temperatures made it impossible to keep them cool and hydrated. These stories missed an opportunity to inform readers of how their dietary choices contribute to those climate emissions. Beef consumption, for example, is a leading driver of food sector emissions. Quote, the cattle industry alone accounts for over 60% of animal agriculture emissions, yet only 30% of the articles that brought up animal agriculture mention the cattle industry. Our research shows that there is a major disparity between the amount of emissions caused by animal agriculture and how much media coverage this industry gets when climate change is the topic of discussion. We see that this is also the case with animal agriculture subsectors like the cattle industry, which receives half the coverage it should, unquote, said Kania Revelo, research associate at Faunalytics. The study also highlights examples of stories that cover food systems emissions more accurately. For instance, the Los Angeles Times mentioned animal agriculture in 14% of articles, higher than all other analyzed news outlets. Additionally, the Los Angeles Times, Reuters, and CNN are highlighted in the report as media that took opportunities to discuss the impact of diet on climate change in their articles that did bring up animal agriculture. Quote, the media holds incredible influence over how we live our lives and the choices we make. We're missing a huge piece of the story by continuing to ignore the role of industrial animal agriculture. With the release of this report, we hope to build a network of journalists and publications who want to fill this gap in coverage and arm readers with the facts, unquote, said Anna Bradley, Executive Director of Sentient Media. The report acknowledges that climate journalists already face an uphill challenge in their work. It's tough enough to get resources for any climate coverage in newsrooms, let alone the intersection of climate and food. In order to boost and improve media coverage of this important cause of climate emissions, Sentient Media hosted a virtual event entitled Making the Climate Connection, linked here, to discuss the findings with climate journalists and researchers. We also published a reporting toolkit for journalists and have launched a new food and farming media network hub for reporters to collaborate and share resources. You just listened to 93% of climate news never mentions meat from sentientmedia.org. And I'm your host, Marian Erickson. And as always, I put a link to the original post in the show notes. From there, you can see the original report. You can also watch the virtual event, Making the Climate Connection, that Sentient Media hosted and facilitated with journalists from various major news outlets. It was fascinating to watch. Really interesting to get a glimpse into the challenges these journalists face trying to get resources and approval to get these articles published. News outlets want articles that are going to get clicks, and readers don't want to read about or face the personal choices, their personal dietary choices, and how they might be impacting the problem. It's a lot easier to get readers behind issues like fossil fuels, where their personal impact isn't quite as evident. But it was fascinating to watch Sentient Media facilitate this conversation, really eye-opening. So it made me understand the intro that I've been reading when I read their articles. They really do change the conversation around animal agriculture. They know these journalists. They are always working to strengthen the advocate in the journalist community, and they partner with these publishers. And they really do hold the media accountable, but they also provide resources to help them. It's not just a mission statement. It's not just lip service. It's really what they do. It's pretty cool. So in this article, they have a couple links. They mention that they've created some resources for journalists. And I might highlight these separately if you're interested, but they have a food and farming climate media toolkit with all kinds of articles and resources in one place. And then they have the Food and Farming Media Network, which is a community and resource hub for journalists and editors, everyone who works touching the food system. Journalists at all stages of their careers who want to report on agriculture and food systems can apply. And whether they develop recipes or cover the farm bill, it's a community for them all. And members will have access to reporting and freelance resources, self-guided courses to improve their coverage, members-only events with food and climate journalists and publishers, mentorship, a bi-weekly newsletter filled with the latest pitching opportunities, and plenty of time for networking. Members of this Food and Farming Media Network have published at top media outlets, and they've linked some articles that members have written, like one from The Guardian called Avian Flu Has Led to the Killing of 140 Million Farmed Birds Since Last October, one from Vox called The Biggest Animal Welfare Crisis You've Never Heard Of, about one of the meat industry's cruelest practices, the transport of live farm animals on long, perilous, and often fatal journeys by ship. But it's a great network of journalists and support for journalists. How cool is that? Sentient Media is an amazing organization. I'm so grateful to be able to share their articles because they're always excellent. All of their writers are amazing. And gosh, this sounds like a Sentient Media advertisement, but I'm just really so excited about what they're doing. So if you know anybody who is writing or wants to be writing about any of that kind of stuff, point them to the link that I'll share in the show notes, and they can apply to become part of the Food and Farming Media Network. And please share this episode with anyone who might benefit, and thanks for listening.